And good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you're expecting something great to happen this morning. I really do believe God's going to meet with every single one of you this morning. If you're visiting, you're a guest, we're so glad you're here. Everything we do is for people like you, so please feel welcome, feel at home. Everyone else, like Becca said, you're all welcome as well. And if you've been here for any period of time, you've heard us say constantly that we are all about leading people to follow Jesus. That is what we see as our mission. We want everyone that we come in contact with to have an encounter with Jesus. So in every ministry environment in our church, I'm always asking the question, how are we leading people to follow Jesus in that environment? In our worship services here, in our Sunday school classes, in the middle school, in the high school, in your small groups, your TLCs. I mean, you name it. I'm always asking this question. We all want to know this. How are we leading people to follow Jesus? And it's very simple for us. See, my life was completely changed, transformed when I met Jesus. And all of our staff, all of our leaders, most of you, you can point back to your encounter with Jesus as the changing point, as the fulcrum, as this is the pivot point. Everything changed at this moment when I met Jesus because we believe he's the answer. You've heard me say and us say that when you read the Bible, the thing that stands out more than anything, especially the gospel, is that people that were nothing like Jesus, people who looked nothing like him, who didn't talk like him, who didn't behave like him, who didn't even believe like him. For some reason, they liked Jesus. And Jesus liked people who were nothing like him. He was always hanging around in a relationship with people who were nothing like him. Because at the very center is we believe if you have a relationship with Jesus, miracles are going to happen in your life. Faith is going to be born. Things are going to begin to happen. So this is part of the Great Commission. We believe, when Jesus, right before he left, he said, go and make disciples of all nations. And that sounds like something for a professional. That sounds like something for Pastor Tim to do, or Craig, or someone like that, but not for little old me. Here's the thing. I believe, and I think the scripture teaches, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you, that is actually your calling. Every single one of you are called to make disciples. And that sounds too scary, but it's actually as simple as leading people to follow Jesus, being the light of the world, the salt of the earth. And a very tangible thing you can do as part of fulfilling this calling is making a simple invitation to Easter. See, Easter is coming up, and this is one of the 2 times a year where people are so open to coming to church. So maybe a simple invitation you make can be the beginning of making a disciple. So in your bulletin, every single one of those bulletins have this card here. It says, My Easter Story. That's our theme. That's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best theme we've ever had at our church. It's going to be so amazing, starting Easter for the next month. And on the back of that card gives you all the details of our Easter services, all the information, and we have something for everyone. So, sounds cliche, but it's so true that a simple invitation can make all the difference in the world. Just this week, and of course it had to be this week, I got a phone call from someone I haven't talked to in 15 years. His name is Tom. And when I was a freshman in high school, 1994, I believe, I was a freshman, which means I have no influence, no popularity. My head's in the toilet more often than it's not. And this is a senior in high school, but for some reason we were friends. We played sports together, and I invited him to come to Easter. And he came to the Easter service, and he hated it because it was in Spanish, and he didn't speak Spanish. I should have thought through the details of inviting him, but he came anyways. He never came back again, and his life went haywire. He went all over the map, got into the wrong scene, got involved in the wrong crowd, started getting all sorts of addictions and vices that just ruined his life. He went from rehab program to rehab program, had children, lost custody. He's just had this very difficult life. 2 years ago, he made his way back to church. He met Jesus, and Jesus changed his life. He's been in recovery for 2 years now, which is the longest he's been free from alcohol and narcotics since high school. And God, he called me to tell me how even in that service that was Spanish, he had no idea what was going on. People were dancing and talking. He didn't know if it was talking in tongues or just talking in Spanish. It was the same to him. He said in that service, something happened where I saw a faith that I didn't want to believe in, but it was there. And his life is being changed now. And that was like 20 years ago when I made a silly invitation that I think didn't make any difference, but he points back to that moment being something that reminded him, that brought him to the place of faith now. So that sounds like a pastor story. Of course, that would happen to Ray. He's been doing this. No, this happens every day to everyday people. And I've actually asked 2 people from our church you might not know to come up and kind of share their story so that you know that God is actually at work in your life. So would Amy and Mariah come forward? They are here. And yep, there they are. Let's give them a hand as they come up. This is really cool. Here, you guys can stand up here because the light, it's just the weird way it works. Okay, so this is Mariah. Mariah is relatively new here. And this is Amy, and some of you know Amy as well. And I'm just going to ask them a couple questions. So, Mariah, can you tell us what this church has meant to you, what God has been doing in your life these last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. So this church really means like my support. That you guys have been my support group, and I can say that, and then you guys can kind of absorb it. But to really understand how truly like that has impacted my life, you guys kind of have to understand a little bit of my backstory. So my mom passed away in September, and I lost her, and my mom was my life. You know, my mom was my world, and I lost her. And then I had to move up here to Kirkland with my dad, and I used to live in Maple Valley. So I lost my mom, but I also lost my friends and my family and everyone else. So I basically felt like I had lost everything. And I came up here, and I felt so alone and just down in the dumps and just kept going lower and lower and lower. And then I came to this church, and you guys helped me realize that I'm not alone, you know? And you guys have been my support network when I thought I didn't have one. And and then beyond that, you guys have helped me grow in my faith with, you know, my religious walk, and you guys have helped me grow with God, which is so incredibly important. So thank you.
Thank you, Mariah. That's great. Well, I got one more question for her. Mariah, how in the world did you make it here to Washington Cathedral?
My neighbor, Amy, invited me.
All right. Now, Amy invited her. Okay, I just want to point that out. So, Amy, can you tell us what this church has meant to you, please?
Sure. And so much of what this church has meant to me is really what led me to invite Mariah, because I had shared with Mariah that I had been praying for her and for many months, actually, before really inviting her. And I'm just praying for her and her family. And because I had actually come to this church around as a young teenager myself, and on an invitation from a friend, just coming to some silly, fun youth group thing. If they got 30 people there, they'd throw a pie in a pastor's face. And I know that tradition carries on today, but it started out as a silly and fun place, but it also became much of a second family to me. My mom was also at that time battling cancer, and she was a Christian, and she really wanted me to feel that sense of belonging and love. So she, of course, supported me coming here. And the church, I remember leaving that first time that I had come to the church, and the words that stuck to me, both from a youth pastor and Pastor Tim as I was leaving, was that, and they didn't know anything about me, but that they were praying for me and my family. And that has always stuck to me, because I think as a family in the Church of God, we are to pray for one another and encourage one another, and it simply became more than just praying for one another. The church has walked alongside me, and a youth pastor met one-on-one and discipled me as well. And now I'm raising, my husband Todd and I are raising, got married here in the church almost 15 years ago, and are raising our 3 children here. And it is fun for me, and wonderful to see that they are truly God's children, because they are now, my daughter this last week, I got an email from her teacher, and I was like, I opened it up, and she said, I just wanted you to know that Marin raised her hand in class today. I didn't say this at first, but she rose her hand, and she let her teacher know that she was praying for her. And it's just neat to see that extension, because I know that their Sunday school teachers here are telling them that. And so I just wanted Mariah, and it's easy for me to invite people because I know they will sense welcoming and belonging. There's so many places to belong here in this church.
Great. Thank you, Amy. That's awesome, and this story is amazing. I just want to point something out in case you missed it. I doubt you missed it, but just in case. Mariah is meeting God and her faith, and she's finding family here. And she's here because of an invitation by Amy, who found God, her faith, family here because of an invitation. Did you guys catch that? Okay, cool. Let's give them one hand real quick. Here, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. And the truth of it is that I could actually have any one of you come up here, and your story might be a little bit different with the details, but you would end it by saying, and I'm here because someone invited me here. It might have been your family, might have been an extended family, a friend, a neighbor, a coach, a teammate, a coworker, someone. You are here. You are walking with God because someone somewhere in your life invited you. And that is what we call making disciples, leading people to follow Jesus. So that's why I am challenging myself, and I'm challenging all of you to pray. Because get this, do you think God knew what he was doing when he put Mariah, who lost her mom, right next to Amy, who lost her mom? Do you think God did that by accident, or do you think God knew what he was doing? I am under the impression that God is a genius, brilliant, like the best chess player in the world, and that he could figure these kind of details out. And it wasn't an accident. It was because God knew exactly what he was doing. And I bet you that if I sat down over coffee with you, we could figure out that God has put some people in close proximity to you. And he didn't do it accidentally. He did it so that you can be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. So, you got the invitations. The ushers, they're going to be giving you some on the way out, because one is probably not going to be enough for the number of people God put in your life. And then TLC leaders, small group leaders, go and pick these up in the connection center so you can give them out during the small group you have in this week or next week. So I spent 10 minutes on that, and I think it was important. And I hope you guys feel that kind of challenge from God. Now, that being said, I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to move back to the story of Elisha. Some of you have been trekking along for a few weeks, and we've been following the story of this amazing prophet. He's a hero, and his name is Elisha. And like I said earlier, if I had known his story before Elijah was born, Elijah would be named Elisha. Sorry, Elisha is just a cooler prophet than Elijah. Sorry, my son. But I still love him. But Elisha, his life can be defined or described as ridiculous. He faces these circumstances that are just absurd. They're preposterous. They're outlandish. They just make no sense. But through it all, no matter how difficult a situation, no matter how tough, no matter how hopeless it seems, somehow, some way, Elisha has ridiculous faith. And here's what I mean by that. Everyone around him looks at him and says, "You're crazy. What are you doing? Why aren't you panicking? Why aren't you nervous? Why aren't you screaming?" And there's something in Elisha, this sense of peace, that despite everything that's happening, despite that there's an army, a countless army of people surrounding me who want to kill me, somehow Elisha knows God's with me. God is in control. I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to respond like anyone else would respond. And everyone looks at that and says, that's ridiculous. And it is, but that's the kind of faith that God is calling all of us to have. And what we're going to see today is that some of us look at that story and say, okay, fine. That's fine for Elisha. He has that. But he's a hero. There's books. There's stories about him in the Bible. I'm just a normal person. What about me? I don't have that kind of ridiculous faith. And what I hope to show you today by this story is that even just a little bit of faith, just a little bit, can go a long way. So if you have a Bible, I'm going to invite you to open up to 2 Kings chapter 4, and we're going to read this really cool story of Elisha. And let me just make a quick clarification. We are in no way advocating or proponents of going out and doing something crazy because it's what God told you to do. Nothing like that. This is just ridiculous faith in the sense of you're trusting in God. Just this week, couple weeks ago, a friend of mine was telling me a story of a pastor who, I think it was Tennessee or Kentucky, who died because he was handling poisonous snakes. And it's sad that he died, and usually I'm not a proponent of like making fun of people or laughing at those kind of things. That's just sad, but maybe in this case it's a little bit funny because, and it's not just me, I think that imagine this guy's gonna get to heaven one day and God's gonna say, what were you thinking? Are you serious? Of all the verses in the Bible, you're gonna focus on the one on holding poisonous snakes. And I think God's gonna be smiling or laughing and maybe trying to hold it in or something, but come on, don't be crazy. That's not ridiculous faith. That's just dumb. What you put the adjective in there that you're allowed to say in your family. I'm allowed to say dumb. I can't say anything else. So it is not. Don't do that. We're not saying that. What we are saying is that when you face situations like this story we're about to read in, you could have confidence that God is with you. So this story for this main character is a message of hope. It's a message of hope for all of you. If you've ever felt like this person, overwhelmed, you felt like there's too much going on, you felt like there just isn't enough. Not enough. Not enough time, not enough resources, not enough energy, not enough support, not enough help, not enough money, you name it. If you've ever felt like there's not enough faith, you feel like you're running on empty, you feel like there's no more options, then this is a story for you. And you're going to meet the God of ridiculous provision. And here's our main character. Chapter 4, verse 1. One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, "My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves." So this is a backstory. This is our main character. It's a widow. We don't know her name. Some people think from the Jewish tradition that she might be the wife of Obadiah. But here's what we do know. She's a widow, which means she lost her husband. It's sad. She's in grief. It's tragic. We know that. I mean, anyone who's loved a loved one knows how she feels when that is. And she has 2 children, so imagine how the children feel. They've lost their father. But there's another aspect of the story that I want to point to because it's more relevant to what's happening. Because she lives in a completely different time, society, cultural context than any one of us live in. And in that culture, men were the financial bedrock of the family. So when the men died or when the husband was gone, the family was immediately thrown into crisis and usually the majority of the time into extreme poverty. See, this is a time where there is no life insurance. So in this culture, like in many cultures still around the world, women could not own property. They were completely dependent on their husband. So when he passed away, here's the truth of the situation. She is in trouble, and there's no other way of looking at that. In some places, she would be given to the next of kin. So this widow, here's what that means. There's no alternatives for her. There's no more options left. There's no chance at meaningful employment. And on top of that, her husband died, leaving her a debt. So she's lost everything. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have property. She can't pay off the debt. But the creditor comes and says, "You owe me the debt now." And she probably says, "Hey, I can't pay. There's nothing I can do." And he says, "There actually is something you can do. Here's what you can do to pay off the debt. I'm going to take your 2 sons, your 2 children, and I'm going to have them for myself as slaves. And they'll work for me. And that way we can cancel the debt." So imagine this poor widow. She lost her husband. She's lost everything she knows. She doesn't have a house or whatever she owned. And now the only thing she has is our 2 children. And this creditor is threatening to take them away. So humanly speaking, it doesn't get any worse than this. Her back is up against the wall. She doesn't have options. There doesn't seem to be a solution. There's no easy answer for this. There isn't a hotline she can call. There's really no options for her. See, in the Bible, the word, this is the equivalent of the poorest of the poor. Widows and orphans are always combined. So the two children are relying on a mom who has no options. And the biblical word for orphan translates to fatherless, and that's what they are. And UNICEF today still uses that definition of orphans. Anyone who's lost a father is considered an orphan when you look at those statistics. And it's because of this reason I'm talking about. There's no financial stability now. They've lost all of that. They're completely dependent on a miracle at this point. This is a tough situation. And the truth of it is that none of us is probably ever going to face a situation quite like this. And it's real, and it's happened in the story, and it's probably happening somewhere around the world. And this uncomfortable, and even though it's hard to relate to it, I want us to relate. I want us to get inside the story because it's a good reminder. This is a good reminder for me that when I get riled up over my easy problems or the things I complain about, it's a good reminder to remember that in the big picture, they're not that big a deal. So I asked my wife, I said, hey, Elise, what are some of the things that I complain about throughout the week that aren't that big a deal? And this just made her day. She was at this for hours, just making a list. And here's some of the stuff she mentioned. She said, here's some of the complaints I had this week. My iPhone, the GPS on my iPhone took me to the wrong place. That was one of my complaints. My salad had too much goat cheese. I don't like too much goat cheese. It's only standard definition and not high definition. I don't want to watch the game on standard definition. My team only made the Final Four. We didn't win the championship. So those aren't things I complained about years ago or 10 years ago. That was this week. This week, I made those complaints, and I got riled up over it. I got frustrated and complained and wondered, does God exist? And I'm not that far, but I try to remember this, that sometimes I complain or get, all frustrated over things that aren't that big a deal. This is a situation that we're never going to quite face, but here's what is going to happen. If it hasn't happened already, at some point in your life, the emotions that this widow is feeling, her sense of hopelessness, her sense of no more options, her sense of desperation, that is something you can relate to, or at some point in your life you will relate to. There's gonna be a point in your life, some point, somewhere, where you're gonna experience exactly what she's experienced, where you're gonna look at your situation and you're gonna feel like your back is against the wall. You're gonna feel like there's no more options left. You're gonna feel like, I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. I've prayed, I've thought about it, I've talked to counselors, I've talked to pastors. I don't see a solution to this. Maybe it's one of your children, and they're walking away from God now. And you've prayed with them. You've talked with them. You've sent them the best-selling Christian books. You've sent them the best CDs out there. And that just pushes them farther and farther away. And you're like, God, I don't know what else to do. See, in that situation, your only option is God, just like this widow. Maybe it's financial pressure. And it's just the debt is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you don't see an end in sight. In that situation, God is your only option. Maybe it's a health issue, a sickness that comes on suddenly, or a health issue you've had for years. And you're wondering, and you've prayed, and you've memorized the verses. You've had people anoint you with oil. You've tried everything. You even called the preacher on the TV, right? You send them something, and they send it back. You try, and nothing happened. And you're wondering, God, what else can I do? See, there are situations, not quite like this one, like this widow, but there are times when we feel what she feels. And we're wondering what to do. And here's what the story is all about. It's about a person in a desperate situation who doesn't have any more options. And her only bet is her best bet. It's for her to go to God. And the way we're going to put it is that when you don't have what you really want, God is what you really need. See, when you find yourself in that situation, what you really need is God. And that's what this story is there for, to remind us that even in the most desperate situation, when we feel like we don't have any options, we always have the option of God. And if we're honest with ourselves, that is the best option. So what does this woman do? She goes straight to God. She goes to Elisha, who represents God in this story, and he's the prophet. God speaks to him, and he speaks to the people. So she goes to God and says, God, here's my problem. Here's what I'm worried about. These are my concerns. This is what keeps me up at night. This is where I'm desperate about. And she tells God her problems. And then God responds, and that's where we'll pick up there. So verse 2 says this, what can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in your house? So what can I do to help you? Elijah doesn't say, too bad, I'll pray about it, good luck figuring that out. He gets involved and says, he makes himself available and says, what can I do to help? What do you have in your house? And she says, nothing at all. I don't have anything. Nothing at all. Because when we're in this situation, when you're in that situation, when I'm in that situation, it's so easy to focus on the problem. It's so easy to focus on what we don't have. It's easy to focus on the walls that are coming in all around us. And it's hard to look at what we still have. It's hard to remember that we still have God as an option. So she says nothing at all, and then she backtracks and says, wait a second. Except a flask of olive oil. But really, what's that going to do? In my situation, with the debt that I have, with me almost losing my kids, what's one thing of olive oil going to do? Aren't there so many stories in the Bible and in your life where God does so much with so little? The fishes and the loaves, Moses and his staff, David and his sling. I mean, aren't there countless stories of God taking the little bit we offer him, the little bit we have, to do the miraculous, to do the impossible, to do things that we can never even imagine? So Elisha tells her, hey, let's not worry about what you don't have. Let's give God what you do have. The little bit you have, even if it seems worthless, even if it's little, let's give it to God and see what God does with that. And here's what I know, just from my cursory read of the Bible. God always takes that little and does so much with it. And why does God wait till the last second? Why does God wait until we're desperate? Why does God wait until we have a little? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know this, that even just a little bit of faith, even just a mustard seed, that's what Jesus said. If you had faith like a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain, move. You can tell that problem, it's going to be okay. You can look at the army and say, hey, God's with me. You can look at your situation and say, hey, God is still in control. And maybe that's why. Maybe that's why God waits until we have a little. So you can take that little bit of faith, even if you don't believe like Elisha does. Maybe you're like this widow. All you need is a little. And you take that little baby step towards God. And you watch as God does a miracle. Because of course, that's what God does. So verse 3, here's the miracle. Elisha says, borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from the flask that you have, your little bit, into the jars, setting each one aside when it's filled. So she did as she was told. Her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she filled one after another. Soon every container was full to the brim. Bring me another jar, she said to one of her sons. There aren't any more, he told her. And then the olive oil stopped flowing. And when she told the man of God, Elisha, what had happened, he said to her, now, sell the olive oil, pay your debt. That's your problem, that's your situation, figure that out. And then you and your sons can live on what is left. That's ridiculous provision. There is no option for her. She's relying on God. It's either God or nothing, God or bust. God comes through for her. Again, God comes through for her. She offers God the little bit she has. She offers God the little bit of oil, and God takes that and does a miracle. See, this is a story about coming to God with your little bit of faith and trusting Him to give you what you need. It's a story about someone who doesn't have much except a little, and they go to God, and God comes through for them because He is a God of ridiculous provision, because He is God, our provider. That's what happens in the story. She is in need of a miracle. She's desperate. And then God comes through with provision, ridiculous provision. When you don't have what you really want, what you really need is God. God is what you really need. So I don't know where you find yourself this morning, but I'm sure you're in a situation, there's someone, you've been there or you're going to be there, where you're going to have no more options. Don't forget this story. There's going to come a time where you feel like, I don't have enough faith. I don't feel that confidence. I don't sense that peace. Don't forget this story. That just with a little bit of faith, you taking one step towards God, even a baby step, God is going to meet you ridiculously. This is a story of a woman who doesn't have any more options, no more resources. There's not enough. She goes to God, and God answered her. So in your situation, with whatever you're facing, have you gone to God yet? Have you told God what you're worried about? Have you gone to God and complained about what's happening? Have you gone to God and told Him what you're anxious about, what you're nervous about? Have you told Him what's keeping you up at night? Have you gone to God like this woman has? See, in my life, in my journey, as I've been trying to figure this out, there's been so many examples of God coming through for me. My second year when we were down in Honduras, we were with this project, we lost all of our donors, the majority of them. And we were worried, how are we going to feed the kids? How are we going to educate them? How are we going to continue this project? And what happened? God came through for us. He provided. He gave us exactly what we needed. I mean, our church, in our current situation, we were put in a situation where we had to sell this building to pay off debt that was due right away, and we put it on the market, and we waited and we waited and we waited, and our deadline was December, and we waited, and December came and nothing happened, and none of the offers were good enough. And then on Christmas Eve, what happens? God provides this miraculous provision where we're able to use this building and that building, and we're going to be almost debt free. I mean, only God can do that. And I have so many stories of my life when my back's been against the wall, where I've had no more options and I needed God, and God was the only way that I was going to get through this, and I got through it. And here's the truth. You have those same stories. If you're here today, if you're alive today, it's because somewhere in your past, God provided for you what you needed, whether it was resources or support or family or encouragement or affirmation or identity, whatever it is you needed, God provided for you. But here's what happens to you, and here's what happens to me. It's as simple as this. I forget all that God has done for me, and I focus on my problems today. And maybe that's why there's so many stories, story after story after story in the Bible of God's ridiculous provision, to remind us of all the times God has come through for us, of all the times God has come through for you. Here's what I believe. That the best way to describe God is Heavenly Father, because that's what Jesus did. And that our Heavenly Father has made a covenant, a promise to you. That once He adopted you, He said, I will provide for you. I will protect you. And then Jesus put it like this, and I want to close with this little passage here. It's in Matthew. Jesus closed like saying this: ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And don't miss this. Verse 8, if you've been asleep, wake up. This is what you want. For everyone who asks, receive. That's a promise. The one who seeks finds. That's another promise. And the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father, Father in heaven, give good gifts to those who ask him? So here's what I want you to do. It's very simple. This week, next week, sometime before Easter, here's what your action step is. I want you to ask. I want you to seek. And I want you to knock. At some point, I want you to get before God and ask. No matter how ridiculous it might seem, just ask. Just go to him and tell him what you're worried about, what you're anxious about, what you're concerned about, whatever it is. Go to God, ask. I want you to seek him, to make him a priority, to take some time to read the Bible, to have your quiet time, to have your devotion, to make him a priority. And then I want you to knock and to not stop knocking until God opens the door. It's as simple as that. So will you go and ask? Will you seek? And will you knock? And if you do that, here's my prayer. Here's what we're going to be praying for you. Imagine this happening next week. All of you come back, and now you have your own story, a new story of how God provided, how God came through for you, how God came through in the last second. And you're going to come up and say, Ray, you're not going to believe it. God did this, A, B, and C. And I'm going to say, I do believe it because God's a provider. And then someone else is going to say, Ray, you're not going to believe what happened. The last second, God provided this. And I'm going to say, I do believe it because our God is a provider and he's provided for you and he's not going to stop providing for you. Ask, seek, and knock. That's our challenge. That's the invitation for all of you, to ask, to seek, and to knock. Would you stand with me? I'm going to close this in a word of prayer, and we're going to pray believing that this week you're going to come back with new stories. Whatever you need, wherever you're at, God is going to meet you. Father, I'm the first in line right here to tell you that I want to see you as Jehovah Jireh, our provider. I want all of us to remember that you've provided so many times in so many different occasions, not just in our lives, but in our families, in the scriptures, in the lives of countless millions of people, so much so that your nickname became the provider. And we want to believe that. We want to remember that. And this week, with confidence, we want to approach you. And we want to ask. We want to seek. And we want to knock. And let the story be a reminder to us that even if we have a little bit of faith, a little bit of olive oil, you can do a lot with a little. So we're coming to you with our mustard seed of faith, believing for you to come through for us. Thank you for this invitation. As we go, would you go with us? Shine your face on us and our families. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.